Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night and felt like you weren't alone? In today's video, I'm sharing a chilling true story from my childhood that still haunts me to this day. Imagine waking up to find a faceless girl standing at the foot of your bed. What would you do? How would you react? This isn't just any ghost story, it's an encounter that my sister and I experienced together, leaving us with lingering fear and unanswered questions. You'll hear about our terrifying night, the eerie calmness I felt, and the long-lasting impact it had on both of us. If you love real-life horror stories and unexplained mysteries, you won't want to miss this. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another spine-chilling tale. Let's dive into this haunting experience. I was just 8 years old when this strange event took place. It was a normal night, and I was sound asleep in my bed. Our house was undergoing renovations at the time, so my older sister, who was 9, was sharing my room. Her room was being fixed up, so she had moved into mine, and we had 2 single beds on opposite sides of the room. Usually, I found it comforting having her there. We would talk before falling asleep, sharing secrets and stories. That night started like any other. We had chatted a bit and then drifted off to sleep. The room was calm, filled with the soft sounds of our breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. In the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure what had stirred me, but I found myself wide awake. The room was dark, lit only by the faint moonlight seeping through the curtains. Everything was quiet. I lay there for a moment, trying to figure out why I had woken up. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I noticed something strange. At the foot of my bed, there was a figure standing there. It was a young girl, about my age, but something was terribly off. She had no face. I could see her shape and her long hair, but where her face should have been, there was just a smooth, featureless surface. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared. I just stared at her, and she stared back, or at least it felt like she was. We were locked in this silent exchange, just looking at each other. Minutes passed, and still, neither of us moved or made a sound. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. My sister was sleeping in the bed on the other side of the room. I decided to call out to her, not because I was frightened, but because I wanted her to see what I was seeing. "Hey, wake up," I whispered at first. She didn't stir, so I called her name louder. "Wake up, you have to see this." Finally, she woke up and groggily looked over at me. I pointed towards the girl at the foot of my bed. My sister's eyes widened in shock. Unlike me, she was instantly terrified. "And we need to go to Mom and Dad's room," she whispered urgently, her voice shaking. I kept my eyes on the girl while my sister scrambled out of her bed. She ran past the faceless girl, barely glancing at her, and dashed out of the room. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, still oddly calm. Then, without breaking eye contact with the girl, I got out of bed. I walked out of the room, following my sister to our parents' bedroom. The hallway was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the eerie presence in our room. I could hear my sister already whispering frantically to our parents as I approached their door. When I entered their room, my sister was clinging to our mom, trying to explain what we had seen. I joined her, and together we told our parents about the faceless girl. They listened patiently, though I could tell they were skeptical. They tried to reassure us that it was just a dream, or maybe a trick of the light. To calm us down, my dad went to check our room. He turned on the light and looked around, but of course, the girl was gone. He came back and said there was nothing there, but he let us sleep in their room for the rest of the night. The next day, our parents talked to us about what had happened. They tried to make sense of it, suggesting it was just our imaginations. My sister was still shaken, but I felt a strange mix of curiosity and calm. The image of the faceless girl stayed with me, lingering in my mind. Even now, years later, I can still remember that night vividly. The calmness I felt, the fear in my sister's eyes, and the eerie stillness of the faceless girl. It's something I'll never forget. It left us with so many questions and an unsettling feeling that we couldn't quite shake. I woke up in the middle of the night, for reasons I couldn't explain. The room was quiet, with only the soft sounds of my sister's breathing filling the air. The moonlight streamed through the curtains, casting a faint glow across the room. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something unusual at the foot of my bed. There, standing perfectly still, was a young girl. She looked about my age, with long hair cascading down her shoulders. But what struck me the most was her face, or rather the lack of it. Where her face should have been, there was nothing but a smooth, blank surface.
No ais, no nose, no moltre.
Just a featureless void. Despite how strange and unsettling it was, I didn't feel scared. Instead, I felt a curious calmness. I sat up a little, rubbing my eyes to make sure I wasn't dreaming. But the girl remained, unmoving and silent, at the foot of my bed. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. She didn't move or make a sound, and I found myself strangely fascinated by her presence. The room was so still, it was as if time had stopped. The only thing I could hear was the steady beat of my own heart. The girl's figure was clear in the moonlight. She wore a simple dress, old-fashioned and plain. Her long hair was dark, blending into the shadows behind her. The smooth, faceless head was the only thing that stood out starkly in the dim light. It was eerie, yet I couldn't look away. I wasn't frightened, just curious. I wondered who she was and why she was there. I felt a strange connection to her, as if we were sharing a silent understanding. Minutes passed, and still, neither of us moved. The longer we stared at each other, the more I felt like I was looking into a mirror, reflecting something unknown and mysterious. My sister was asleep in the bed across the room. I thought about waking her up to see if she could see the girl too. Maybe she could help me understand what was happening. I whispered her name softly, not wanting to break the spell of the moment. "Hey, wake up," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My sister didn't stir, so I called her name a little louder. "Wake up, you have to see this." She groaned and turned over, finally opening her eyes. She looked at me with sleepy confusion. "Oh, what's going on?" she mumbled, still half asleep. I pointed towards the foot of my bed, my finger shaking slightly. Look," I said. There's a girl standing there." My sister's eyes widened as she focused on the faceless girl. Her reaction was immediate and completely different from mine. She gasped, sitting up quickly and clutching her blanket. What is that? Who is she?" she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. Unlike me, she was terrified by the sight of the faceless girl. We need to go to Mom and Dad's room," as she insisted, her voice urgent. She threw off her blanket and jumped out of bed, running towards the door. I stayed where I was for a moment, still watching the girl. She hadn't moved at all, just continued to stand there, staring back at me with her blank face. Finally, I decided to follow my sister. I climbed out of bed slowly, my eyes never leaving the girl. I walked past her cautiously, half expecting her to reach out or speak, but she remained still and silent. I felt a strange mixture of calm and curiosity as I left the room. The hallway was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the eerie presence in our room. I could hear my sister already whispering frantically to our parents as I approached their door. I took one last glance back at my room before joining them, the image of the faceless girl still vivid in my mind. That first encounter with the faceless girl left me with a sense of wonder and confusion. I couldn't understand why I wasn't scared, why I felt so calm in her presence. It was a moment that would stay with me forever, leaving me with more questions than answers. After staring at the faceless girl for several minutes, I decided I needed someone else to see her too. My sister was sleeping in the bed across the room, and I figured she should know about the strange visitor. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted to share the experience with someone who might help me understand it. I whispered my sister's name softly at first, "Hey, wake up." She didn't move, so I called a bit louder, "Wake up, you have to see this." Finally she stirred, rubbing her eyes and looking at me with sleepy confusion. "Oh, what's going on?" she mumbled, still half asleep. I pointed towards the foot of my bed, my finger trembling slightly. Look, I said. There's a girl standing there. Her eyes followed my finger, and she saw the faceless girl too. Instantly, my sister's face changed from sleepy confusion to sheer terror. She gasped and sat up quickly, clutching her blanket tightly. What is that? Who is she? She whispered, her voice shaking with fear. Unlike me, she was terrified by the sight of the faceless girl. We need to go to Mom and Dad's room, as she insisted, her voice urgent and panicked. She threw off her blanket and jumped out of bed, her movements frantic. She didn't wait for me to respond, she just ran straight to the door. I stayed where I was for a moment longer, still watching the girl. She hadn't moved or made any sound. I felt strangely calm, even though my sister was clearly scared out of her mind. I couldn't understand why I wasn't feeling the same fear. Finally, I decided to follow my sister. I climbed out of bed slowly, my eyes never leaving the faceless girl. I walked past her cautiously, half expecting her to reach out or speak, but she remained still and silent. My heart was beating a bit faster, but I wasn't terrified like my sister. I stepped into the hallway, which was dark and quiet. The contrast between the eerie presence in my room and the normalcy of the hallway was striking. I could hear my sister already whispering frantically to our parents as I approached their door. When I entered our parents' room, my sister was clinging to our mom, trying to explain what we had seen. Her words were rushed and filled with panic. There's a girl in our room. She doesn't have a face, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. I joined her, calmly recounting what had happened. I woke up and saw a girl standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't have a face, but she didn't do anything. She just stood there. My parents listened, their faces a mix of concern and skepticism. To calm us down, my dad decided to check our room. He turned on the light and looked around, but of course, the girl was gone. He came back and said there was nothing there, but he let us sleep in their room for the rest of the night. My sister was still shaking, but I felt a strange sense of peace. The next morning, our parents talked to us about what had happened. They tried to make sense of it, suggesting it was just our imaginations or a trick of the light. My sister was still shaken, but I remained calm and curious. The image of the faceless girl stayed with me, lingering in my mind. Even though my sister and I had both seen the same thing, our reactions were completely different. She was terrified, while I felt oddly calm. It was a moment that bonded us in a strange way, yet also highlighted how differently we processed fear. The experience left us with many questions and an unsettling feeling that we couldn't quite shake. My sister avoided talking about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about the faceless girl. Who was she? Why had she appeared to us? The mystery of that night remained with me, a puzzle I couldn't solve. My sister was the first to react. As soon as she saw the faceless girl, she bolted out of bed, her movements frantic and panicked. We need to go to Mom and Dad's room, she whispered urgently, her voice trembling with fear. Without waiting for me, she dashed out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind her. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and calm. The faceless girl remained standing at the foot of my bed, as still and silent as ever. I knew I should follow my sister, but I couldn't take my eyes off the girl. There was something mesmerizing about her presence. Slowly, I climbed out of bed. My heart was beating a bit faster, but I wasn't terrified like my sister. I took a deep breath and began to walk towards the door, never breaking eye contact with the girl. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was as if she was waiting for something. As I passed her, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I half expected her to reach out or speak, but she remained motionless. I stepped into the hallway, which was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the eerie presence in my room. The transition from the unsettling atmosphere of the bedroom to the normalcy of the hallway was jarring. I could hear my sister already whispering frantically to our parents as I approached their door. Her voice was filled with panic, and I could imagine her clinging to our mom, desperate for comfort and safety. I took one last glance back at my room before joining them, the image of the faceless girl still vivid in my mind. When I entered our parents' room, my sister was indeed clinging to our mom, trying to explain what we had seen. "There's a girl in our room. She doesn't have a face," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. My parents looked at each other, their faces a mix of concern and disbelief. I joined her, calmly recounting what had happened. I woke up and saw a girl standing at the foot of my bed. She didn't have a face, but she didn't do anything. She just stood there. My parents listened, their expressions growing more serious. To calm us down, my dad decided to check our room. He turned on the light and looked around, but of course, the girl was gone. He came back and said there was nothing there, but he let us sleep in their room for the rest of the night. My sister was still shaking, but I felt a strange sense of peace. The safety of our parents' room was a stark contrast to the eerie feeling of our own. My sister and I shared a makeshift bed on the floor, close to our parents' bed. The familiar sounds of their breathing and the warmth of their presence made me feel secure. My sister, though still scared, began to calm down as well. We spent the rest of the night in our parents' room, trying to forget the faceless girl. My sister fell asleep first, still clutching our mom's hand. I lay awake for a while longer, thinking about what had happened. The girl's image was etched in my mind, but I wasn't scared anymore. I was more curious than anything else. The next morning, our parents talked to us about what had happened. They tried to make sense of it, suggesting it was just our imaginations or a trick of the light. My sister was still shaken, but I remained calm and curious. The image of the faceless girl stayed with me, lingering in my mind. The experience left us with many questions and an unsettling feeling that we couldn't quite shake. My sister avoided talking about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about the faceless girl. Who was she? Why had she appeared to us? The mystery of that night remained with me, a puzzle I couldn't solve. Even now, the memory of that night is vivid. The calmness I felt, the fear in my sister's eyes, and the eerie stillness of the faceless girl are etched in my mind. It was a moment that bonded us in a strange way, yet also highlighted how differently we processed fear. The experience left a lasting impact, one that I still ponder to this day. The next morning, our parents sat us down at the kitchen table to talk about what had happened. My mom looked concerned, while my dad had a serious but calm expression. They wanted to understand exactly what my sister and I had seen and how we felt about it. My sister was still visibly shaken. She described the faceless girl in detail, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of the night before. She was just standing there, at the foot of the bed. She didn't have a face, Mom. It was so scary, as she said, her eyes wide with fear. I told my part of the story too, trying to stay calm. As she didn't do anything. She just stood there and stared at me. I wasn't scared, but it was really strange, I explained. My parents listened carefully, nodding as they took in our words. After hearing us out, my dad decided to check our room again. He turned on all the lights and thoroughly inspected every corner. He looked under the beds, in the closet, and even behind the curtains. Of course, there was no sign of the faceless girl. The room looked completely normal, just as it always did. To reassure us, my parents suggested that it might have been a bad dream or a trick of the light. As sometimes when we're tired, our minds can play tricks on us, and my mom said gently. It's possible that you both had similar dreams because you were sharing the room and talking about things before bed. My sister wasn't convinced, and I could see the doubt in her eyes. But we both saw her. It wasn't just a dream, as she insisted. My dad put a comforting arm around her. I know it felt real, sweetheart, but sometimes our imaginations can be very powerful, he said, trying to soothe her. They let us stay in their room for another night, just to make sure we felt safe. My sister was relieved, but I couldn't stop thinking about the girl. I lay awake that night, replaying the events in my mind, trying to make sense of it all. The image of her faceless head haunted my thoughts. Over the next few days, my parents did their best to distract us and keep us occupied. We spent more time together as a family, playing games and watching movies. They wanted us to feel safe and secure, hoping that the memory of the faceless girl would fade with time. But for me, the curiosity never went away. I wanted to know more about what we had seen. I started asking questions, trying to understand if anyone else had ever experienced something similar. My parents were patient with me, answering my questions as best they could, but they remained firm in their belief that it was just a bad dream. My sister, on the other hand, tried to forget the whole thing. She didn't want to talk about it or even think about it. She avoided our room for a while, preferring to stay close to our parents. It took her some time to feel comfortable sleeping in her own bed again. As the days turned into weeks, life slowly returned to normal. The renovations in my sister's room were completed, and she moved back into her own space. Our bedtime routine resumed its usual rhythm, and the memory of the faceless girl began to fade, though it never completely disappeared. My parents continued to reassure us whenever the topic came up. They maintained that it was just a strange, vivid dream, a product of our young imaginations. "You're safe now," they would say. "There's nothing to be afraid of." Even though I accepted their explanations, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that what we had seen was real. The calmness I felt during the encounter, contrasted with my sister's fear, left me wondering about the nature of the experience. It was a mystery that lingered in the back of my mind, a puzzle I couldn't quite solve. To this day, I think back to that night with a mix of curiosity and unease. The faceless girl, the silent staring, and the shared experience with my sister left a lasting impression on me. It was a moment that bonded us, even if it also highlighted our different reactions to fear. The experience was a strange, unforgettable chapter in our childhood. The experience with the faceless girl left a lasting impact on both my sister and me. For my sister, the fear lingered. Even after she moved back into her own room, she often woke up in the middle of the night, frightened by shadows and strange sounds. It took a long time for her to feel truly safe in our house again. She avoided talking about that night and didn't want to be reminded of it. For me, it was different. I wasn't scared in the same way my sister was, but the encounter filled me with a deep sense of curiosity and wonder. I couldn't stop thinking about the faceless girl. Who was she? Why had she appeared to us? What did she want? These questions swirled in my mind, and I found myself replaying the events over and over, searching for answers that never came. The memory of the girl standing silently at the foot of my bed was etched into my mind. Her faceless head, her stillness, and the calmness I felt while staring at her were all so vivid. It felt like there was some hidden meaning in the encounter, something just out of reach that I couldn't quite grasp. As I grew older, the intensity of the memory faded, but it never disappeared entirely. I would often think back to that night, especially when I was alone in the dark. Sometimes, I would catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the faceless girl standing there. I never talked about it much, even with my sister. She preferred to forget, and I didn't want to scare her by bringing it up. Whenever the topic of ghosts or supernatural experiences came up, I would feel a chill run down my spine, remembering our encounter. But I would stay silent, keeping my thoughts to myself. The questions about the faceless girl remained unanswered. I tried to find logical explanations, but nothing ever seemed to fit. It wasn't a dream, my sister had seen her too. It wasn't a trick of the light, the memory was too clear. The mystery of that night stayed with me, a puzzle I couldn't solve. There were times when I wanted to know more, to dig deeper into the experience and try to understand it. But there was also a part of me that was afraid of what I might find. The unknown is a powerful thing, and the fear of uncovering something even more unsettling kept me from pursuing it further. As I reached my teenage years, I decided to stop talking about the event altogether. Whenever it crossed my mind, I would push the thoughts away, focusing on something else. It was easier that way, to pretend it had never happened, to bury the memory and move on. But no matter how hard I tried, the image of the faceless girl would sometimes resurface, especially in moments of quiet or darkness. It was a reminder that some things in life are beyond our understanding, that there are mysteries that defy explanation. The lasting sense of dread stayed with me. It wasn't a constant fear, but a subtle underlying unease. It was a feeling that there was more to the world than what we could see and understand, and that sometimes, the unknown could touch our lives in unexpected ways. In the end, I chose to accept the experience for what it was, a strange, haunting encounter that left me with more questions than answers. It was a part of my past, a memory that shaped the way I saw the world. And while I might never fully understand what happened that night, I knew it was something I would never forget. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes think back to that night. The faceless girl, the calmness I felt, and the fear in my sister's eyes are all as clear as ever. It's a reminder of the mysteries that exist just beyond our understanding, and the lingering sense of dread that comes with knowing there are things in this world we may never fully comprehend.